Oh, cool. It said this is now being recorded on my. Huh. Pretty fancy.
Okay, it is 5:30. I'm gonna Wednesday, November 2nd, 2022. I will call the executive committee meeting of the Board of Education together, and Colin and I are on the committee at FIPS, and as Tony Vlastelica and our superintendent will be back in a little bit too, are here as well. The first thing is we've been talking about the high impact board superintendent relationship book. And specifically last time we talked about honing in on exploring a little bit about the reorganization of committees into possibly the system that they have in the book here. And the three of us were going to just kind of talk about, you know, whether or not that was something that we thought would fit with our duties that we have. Would it make it more effective? So one of the things that I looked at is, you guys will find it nice to know that one of the things it says in here is that you really shouldn't have anyone on any more than one committee. Because of the size of our board, we would actually have to take one of the committees that they suggest, which is this external stakeholder relations, and you'd have to merge that with the governance or the board operations committee, and then you would just be down to two basically standalone committees that we would put three members on those. The people that make up the governance or board operations, the book says, is the chair of the board and then the chairs of the different committees. So that would make up this governance or board operations team. And what they are responsible for is really looking at the functioning of the board, keeping the board governing role updated, setting board member performance standards, recommending any revisions to the bylaws, developing and overseeing execution of formal board member like training, ability, orientating new members, and then, of course, the superintendent role. So like ensuring that this superintendent employment contract and position description are updated, and then also doing that progress report of the superintendent. So that's really what that committee, the governance, they either call it the governance or board operations. And if we went with this model, since we have such a small board, the other thing they would be responsible for would be this external stakeholder relations committee, which is really responsible for public image, any development strategies around building, marketing, public relations. So that would have to be kind of rolled up into that governance committee if we were going to do that, which then leaves two other committees, which is the strategic and operational planning committee, and then and also the performance monitoring / audit committee. And I just wanted to go over a little bit, you know, what those entail. The first one, which is strategic and operational planning, this is going to be things like reaching agreement with the superintendent on the detailed design of the planning and budget development cycle. And this is on page 90, if you guys were looking for that. So really on the board's role in planning, annual planning calendar, overseeing preparation, hosting any board superintendent administrative team strategic work sessions, and Then recommending to the board the strategic issues that the district detailed in strategic planning. And so anything that has to do with kind of operational planning, strategic planning, that's what that committee would do. And then the other one would be performance monitoring and audit committee. So this is going to be anything that's not only financial performance, but also educational performance. The budget falls underneath this. Reviewing operational policies, assessments, and annual strategic planning. So everything is more, I would say, more plan-based. So I guess just a discussion about, does that sound like something that we would want to explore? I also wanted to ask Jim if that, you think that that would maybe even, would that align better with, restructuring of district office at all, the way that this is set versus the way we do it now?
I mean, the thing that I liked about this was it was much more of a systems approach, in terms of how you're looking at things and how things really work together, versus something that's standard. So I saw some parallel, even though we're still structured in the business office. And for district operations, where you have to take on the finance, even though it's meant to be serving the instructional core, what's happening in the classroom. It's a comfort level with, we're so used to how we've always anticipated and seen structures. We don't sometimes think of it in the system. What are you really trying to accomplish? Right. But sometimes, and I've heard it from you, Stacy, where you can pick up where we're also consuming some detail that we are sometimes not necessarily zeroing on the big picture of what they're looking to accomplish.
And would this help us do that? Any thoughts, Colin? You're muted.
There we are. There were two things that I had written down as we were discussing. We have a smaller model. Is there any reason that we can't increase our board size? Is there something that would bind us to have this magical number of 7? Could we seek additional seats? I mean, is the work that we're seeing growing, many hands makes light work, is the adage. I mean, would it be a possibility to add additional board members to our board, and then therefore it would have the ability to have that one on each committee? It would also not collapse that strategic, what was it called again? The strategic operational planning committee. That would be taking over the external stakeholder relations. And as we saw last year, the external stakeholder relations was would have been such a pivotal one, because obviously, there's a lot of things going on. Let's get some of that that pumped out as we look for partnerships in the community, and as also we have the foundation entering into the picture. That's going to be a very pivotal committee if we were to be following a model similar to this. So if we were to look to something like this, I think having more people joining would be good. I mean, that's just one thing that really popped up. And then also, is I know we do this the reorg in April. I think that that having this either a decision of whether we move forward or not move forward for April would be good. And then who's ever taking on the presidency next year could then implement or not implement this, or would be aware of this. So that's pretty much what I had, my takeaways on it.
Okay.
I guess, was there any specific thing that you wanted to see from this?
No, I just want to know if it would be something that we even want to, entertain, what we would need to do to explore further. Would it, remember, this is all about how do we be more effective, and
Right.
it is, and designing it this way, and the description here on the committees, would this make us more effective as a board as opposed to the committees that we have now?
I mean, yeah, it would, but at the same time, I don't know. Like, it even said that, the smaller committees you're sacrificing some of the committee for, so it's not as efficient in smaller settings. So the only way that I could think to combat that obstacle would be either add additional seats. Yeah, it would be to add additional seats. I
Okay.
don't I think we're too close to the we are too small of a board to have it this model as it is. Would you be would you be opposed to exploring the addition of maybe two additional seats?
Maybe.
Huh?
Tony has something.
Yeah, just to clarify my understanding, if we move to this model, did I hear you right, Stacy, in that there would be one board member per committee and there would be no other board members on that committee? Is that right?
No. So what they recommend is that they recommend that only every board member serves on one and only one standing committee.
Okay.
Okay. So really there would be only two standing committees, because this governance / board operations one is really just made up of the chairs. So it's kind of like this meeting. It's like the executive meeting. It's not really a standing committee. But the other two would be. So that's where, so you would no longer be on two separate committees. You would just be on one, unless you were a chair. Then you'd automatically be on that other one. Does that make sense?
So you could be on two if you were a chair, right? Is what you're saying.
Correct.
But if you weren't a chair, then it would just be one.
Correct.
Another thing, Stacy, is workload is still going to maintain the same workload faction. So if we have the workload would not change, but that workload would be pumped through those meetings for each one of those committees. They're going to be longer.
Well, this when you read the descriptions though of these committees, the stuff that we're doing right now, we would have to determine whether or not that falls in the purview of the description of the committee. So I think there are a lot of things that this board, tackles that I would say probably, as Jim uses the phrase, might be in the weeds. And that, our job, being effective, systematic, collaborative, would be more focused on these things rather than some of the things that we focus on now.
Yeah.
So for example, personnel, every year, every month, personnel would meet on something. That committee would be no longer, but it would be, some of those tasks would be put into one of these two committees. And it would have to sort of be looked at, examined on whether or not those things that are coming up at the personnel committee, do they really need to come there or not? Are they more internal director type information that doesn't need to, we look at buildings and grounds is probably a better example, is that there's a lot of planning and forethought that comes with the operation of the buildings that doesn't get to buildings and grounds. But that would be the focus, is sort of more of kind of that oversee, you know, rather than down kind of in those details. So, I mean, again, I think you're just moving to a more, what do I want to say? You're doing more planning,
Right.
assessing,
Yeah.
strategy.
One of the things that resonated with me, if you go, you know, to page 93, and you look at the clarifying comments of the paragraph under number 2, you know, I started thinking about what I thought the board was working, you know, was attempting to accomplish. And we get still pulled into a lot of dialogue, a lot of discussion. You know, but he essentially was saying, you really own the work.
Right, at the
You know,
committee level.
At the committee level, and that you know, I hate to suggest rubber stamping, but it really suggests you need to have deep understanding about what you're supporting.
Right.
Because you're going to own this, and you're going to be the one advancing it to the board.
Right. So for example, and again, I'm not on the committee, but I was just at the Building and Grounds Committee, and I read over the safety plan, and I don't have that document. I don't understand it at all. Now, if I were, I better by next Tuesday to vote on it. And I'm going to have to ask other questions from probably Mike Morgan or, you know, Chris. But, you know, the committee should know in and out that document and be able to answer questions, be able to put it forth to the whole committee. And I don't know necessarily that, that's what we're doing at the committee level. So it's to help us be a more effective rather than doing more work. I don't know if that makes sense, but
I mean, you know, no one wants to be in a position where they're not fully grasping or understanding something that they're approving, right, or voting for.
Right.
So I could absolutely relate to that.
yeah, so it's that fine balance between, you know, not getting down in the weeds, and at the board meeting, having this long discussion about, you know, different things, but rather at the committees, that you know that your committee really did the work to, you know, vet whatever that was that is going to come forward to you, and that the committee chair really could probably answer any question about it.
Yeah, if I could add a suggestion to that, you know, if we could really just simplify any topic that we're covering. I think sometimes, you know, it's good to have detail, and, you know, and maybe if we want to really get into the weeds, we have access to that. But I would suggest any attachment that goes in a board doc from a committee chair, you know, simplify the topic to, you know, like 2 or 3 sentences max. And here's why we recommend this and why, right? Or, you know, just something real quick that you can skim over and you're like, yeah, this makes sense, right? Quick sanity check. That would certainly be helpful for me, because I feel sometimes the attachments are like, you know, like 80 pages. I mean, not all the times, but like a lot of times there's, you know, some pretty lengthy attachments. And when you get like a day or two to review that, that's not always realistic.
So, yeah, but now, so, I mean, you have 2 committees that we would essentially have. So we have currently 4. That would be taking all that same workload, pumping it through half the committees. You're going to have still attachments coming through. You're just basically bumping that. I mean, it's going to be it's a consolidation of committee, 1 committee each. It's not, I don't think it's going to streamline anything other than just you're either going left or you're going right. And then after that, at the end of the day, then it gets bumped to the governance. And then from there, then it goes to, or it doesn't even go to governance. Governance is a side bar, but then there's the, then it goes to the board. So you're still required to put certain things of approval. And if you, I don't know. I mean, we currently have 3-hour meetings. I can only imagine how long those would be if we had twice.
Right, and my only argument would be is, do we have the 3-hour meetings because the topics that are presented are not what we should be focused on?
Well, I mean, look at you can look at the amount of time that we spend on each topic, though. Sometimes, like take for example, the strategic planning, as just as a topic item. You know, I attempted to well, I'll get to that in a second, but the strategic planning alone, that was 1 hour. You know, maybe just in discussion, and it wasn't that it wasn't non-valuable discussion. It was pertinent. It was needed and necessary, but that's just one topic. Well, now we pump that into you know, the STEM curriculum, or we have key fobs, or any of these other things where there are contentious issues, or policy even. You know, when they're building policy, we have a ton of policy that we have to revisit. So we're going to have all these policies that are going to require discussion. Still, you're still going to have to put in the work and discuss and debate back and forth the merits of the stuff. It's not like we're reading the policy to each person saying, "Hey, it says here in line 15, you know, developing and overseeing execution." No, that's not what we're just doing. We're debating the fact of the merits of the policy. And then therefore you're going to have an even longer meeting. I don't see that this would be any streamlining of it at all. But I mean, take for example, when I have my agenda for finance, I have like specific earmarks for time that I wanted to see for that. We made it to about an hour and a half. It was supposed to be an hour,
Right.
but I mean, sometimes discussions take longer, even if there's a time, you know, a certain allocated time. You just need to give it the time that people want to take on it. And I don't know if pumping it into a different committee it still would have taken place.
Well, I mean, and again, I mean, we don't have to go this route. So if there's not a huge leaning towards doing that, and maybe we just you know, start off by making our current meetings that we have, our current committees, maybe be a little more strategic, look at that.
Sure.
So maybe we should just do that first.
I'm on board with that. You know, I mean, I know that there is some, you know, we need to streamline it in some way, shape, or form. And, you know, it does take, you know, Lori and Jim's time for these meetings, and just trying to find, you know, they have families that they need to get home to too. And same with, you know, Jessica. I know she spends a lot of time in there. And, you know, if I'm sitting here yammering away, that's time away from their families to hear my own voice. So I think that,
Tony?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, you know, that we're also taking on a lot of big topics, right? I mean, strategic planning is pretty big. This studying new curriculum is big, plus the regular board business that has to get done, right? So again, this is where I think at times, you know, we're ambitious and we want to get a lot done, but, you know, when we're tackling big issues, you know, maybe we just not take on as much at one time, or you know, do a separate meeting. It doesn't have to be in person all the time, right? When these meetings go on, I think everyone, you just kind of reach the point of diminishing returns as far as how productive they become. And so, you know, sometimes less is more, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
You don't want to hear my opinion?
No meetings ever.
No, okay, I'll speak. So, okay, so are we complaining about the length of the meeting? Is that the basis of the argument?
Not for me.
I know it's not from you, but is that the narrative that is being produced, that meetings are too long? Because
By who?
that's what I'm saying, like, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So is it a factor of the length of time? Or is it the factor of community service? Or is it the factor of inhibiting family time? I mean, because I want to know what the purpose of why the meetings are as long as they have to be, because if we don't, we're just going to rubber stamp stuff. So like, I understand I would like the meetings streamlined, but when you mean streamlined, you mean not you. I'm saying that the entity is, then you're not going to get in-depth conversations. And Colin just pointed out that things take time. So is it a factor of that we need to have more meetings that are broken up into smaller, or is it because of people's responsibilities elsewhere? Because what I'm saying is it's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Right.
Like we wouldn't be here if everything was rainbows and butterflies.
My motivation was, what are we investing our time in? And is our time being utilized to the max potential to achieve what we want to achieve? That's the question.
Okay.
And so it got me thinking about when we have all these, what the book calls silo, we're really in different silos when it comes to committees, rather than looking at operations, right, as a whole, right? Operations includes operations academically, operations financially, operations brick and mortar.
I think synergy is the word that would put that all together.
Yeah.
What,
So would we be more effective if we looked at instead of having a combined buildings and grounds and finance, it comes to operations. And then that's where that work gets done, because again, we're all part of this system. And I don't think any one of these silo committees does the system justice. So that's where the idea, comes from this book, is to be most effective. Would it be better? Is the question. They say yes, but that's what that I have out to you guys is, would it be better? Would we be more effective if we linked these systems together rather than trying to do personnel over here? Oh, now personnel also has a financial component. So let's get these two together, rather than, so does that make sense?
so I understand the spirit of why you wanted to have a conversation about it, is to
Right.
try to get the stop gaps to be reduced. The importance of committee discussions are, they're going to go in the weeds sometimes, because like the safety plan, like we have to investigate it, you have to wrestle it. Tony brought up a good point about trying to make them a little bit more consumable, instead of just, because otherwise you just get pushed over with paper and then you have to take the time to read it, which is tasky, but I understand. So for example, today's buildings and grounds, the director chose to only tackle one thing on his agenda. Well, then the meeting was short. So I don't want to get off in the weeds about that,
Sure.
but I'm saying, well, the meeting is short because he wanted it to be short. Now, the chair wanted more on the agenda. The people on the committee wanted more on the agenda, but that's what was chosen for so what I'm saying is the synergy part, I think we should, the directors of the departments or the superintendent working with the chair at that year, or the vice, that synergy is that's a separate, I think that could be tackled internally and then broadcasted through the committee.
Mhm.
So maybe on the committee minutes, the synergy is a part of the committee minutes of how we're going to integrate over the committees. So I think that could be an agenda item that we are going to work on in the committee, but actually work on it, not just talk about it. So,
Right.
so that's in its communication, and it's doing it without interfering with the open meetings laws and other things like that, doing it transparent. How we work on that, I think, is having it on the agenda. And
Well, I think, I'm probably going to keep this on this agenda for one more month, just to see if there's, again, any way that because part of our executive team is also to look at board education and how we can be the most effective board. So I'm hoping what comes out of this is maybe some goals for that. And if it's not rearranging to fit this model, maybe, there's something else.
I think the discussion is surfacing something, that's important. And that is, you're not satisfied with where the district's at. You're not getting what you need, to improve the district, and that's why you're spending a lot of time.
Yeah.
Because we haven't helped you own this stuff, so it can get almost into a rubber stamp because we're passing stuff on because it's not really resonating with us that it makes sense for how this is going to improve student achievement or what we're doing. And I think what's happened is you're digging deeper because that information isn't coming to you in a way where you can own it, understand it, and advance it to the community
So
with full support.
sorry to interrupt, but obviously that's the PR department, so like, obviously, that there's a standing committee alone in this book saying about public relations. So obviously, that is a concern. And I mean, there's no bones about it that there's a concern with how we're presenting to the community, the information. So it's a digestible, correct amount of it, so I think that's what we're hearing. I mean, that's what we're trying to address. So by going in the weeds once in a while, it's because of the community not being happy with what is being presented from a public relations standpoint. So then it becomes a problem. I'm still getting complaints about the grading system. Well, okay, that's still, I'm just saying, we have to proactively put these fires out, not put them out as they're burning, like we got a little preventative maintenance here.
I think what might be helpful. Did you hear hand up, Tom?
I did, but
Go ahead.
I was just gonna add,
It's hard to see.
I'm all in favor for increasing effectiveness and efficiency and getting better. I think everyone's probably got some room to do that, myself included. And frankly, if we're gonna ask that from our staff and the team, then we should be doing the same thing and setting the example. So I think if there's a way to do it better, and Jim, if you feel this is the way to go, and I think we should certainly investigate it further.
So what about this? What if we sort of change the topic, not so much on the book, but really analyzing how are we getting our information, right? Let's really look at how we're getting our information about our silo committee, basically. And then secondly, then we analyze whether or not that is effective. Is that going to work for chairs, members, and board as the whole? I think maybe that is an action item that we can move to start figuring out a process that would work better.
Hey, Stacy, another thing that maybe we could look into is use of subcommittee. There's a lot of stuff that we're taking on. And possibly, I know that the city utilizes it for, and even there's a subcommittee for public safety, there's community development, there's subcommittees for a lot of different things. And making it involving more stakeholders, I don't think it's a bad thing to include more people in the discussion, because you're going to get, and a great example of getting a good product was the behavior subcommittee. We got a great product out of that. The community was able to stand behind it. The board was able to stand behind it. There was a lot of work that went into that. And if the board would have done it, it would have been totally halfway done. I think that that's something that the board would not have been able to produce. A committee would not have been able to produce. It had to come from a subcommittee. And I think it was great that it did. And I think if we can look at other areas to utilize that, we might have some more successes too. I just wanted to say that.
Okay. Anything else? All right. What about, we wanted an update on policies. That's the next thing here.
Just in terms of policy, again, with our turnover in HR was the lead department that would be helping us advance policies. So now it's back in my court, to help with this, and the executive committee was a place where we could send these back to the departments. We recognize Kathy and I attended a meeting, with them to really kind of review where we're at.
And that was Neola.
Neola, okay, so Neola has said we're significantly behind, in terms of, our policies. And on occasion that happens, and they put you through a process of committing to, let's get you current within a year. But that's pretty heavy lifting. But they will help us, and we could bring those things back and sort through them and work to get ourselves caught up in this next year. So that's, I'll work with Neola and start bringing that back, so that somehow we find out, in a digestible way how to do this, kind of make that preview, work in terms of signing to committees, it's sorting some things out. If is it just technical issues where they dotted i's and cross t's and change the legal references, or is it substantive, where you need to spend some more time with it, but that we just start working through that. And I haven't had a chance now with the absence of HR to connect with Neola. Okay, so we signed a contract, to work with them to get us caught up. So now it's just a matter of the process. And I was
Is that above and beyond what we were paying before?
A little bit in terms of the extra work, because we didn't do it when, we were through that review process that would have worked. So they're doing, some extra, but it's still reasonable.
Okay. So at our next exec meeting,
I would believe that I'd be bringing chunks of policies back, and I'll clarify that.
And if you don't?
I'll get COVID again. No.
What are we bound with that contract?
What's that?
What are we bound to with that contract as far as working with Neola? Are we able to work with other procedure? Are we able to write procedures? Are we put forward other procedures? Do we have to use Neola procedures still?
What's happened is both the School Board Association, Neola, kind of take there's so much from the law and other standpoints, and now more risk associated with some of our work, that the School Board Association first started doing policies in helping boards establish policies to help you govern and watch. Neola came in big time, and they actually have taken a lot of the business away from the School Board Association. So they're out there always reviewing the laws, procedures, what's getting played out, to help advise you. But it's always your policy. So they're giving you templates. They're doing some of the research to do this. But you have every right to say, no, I don't like this. We're doing our own. But they'll also say at some point in time, you're on your own then. We'll defend some of the work that we're helping you with. But the more you start veering out, then you're kind of out there alone to maintain that. But that's why Neola, for example, would identify, okay, this is a potential controversial issue. Some might say, we don't want to do any part of this. We want to do this. And that's where they're sometimes coming down with choices to help you work through that policy in terms of what are those critical areas that there appears to be conversation on in differences of opinion, where they will help you guide there. And at anytime, you don't have to accept any policy or to do that. I actually went through and when I was in Southfield Public Schools, I don't remember if we were using Neola or the school board, but we ended up replacing and working with our attorney. But I negotiated a fixed price contract with our attorney, and that came free with that service.
Right.
And so, because they indicated that you have way more policy than you probably should, because when you're adding stuff to the law, you are potentially complicating the challenge with there's so much out there that is governing us. The policy helps keep this really in front of you, because you can do easy searches and find this information out and stuff like that. But we really in Southfield cut our policies down to very little, but our attorneys were also watching out for us for legal aspects of this.
Tony, were you say something?
It's funny Jim said that, because that was one of the first thoughts I had as I started to wrap my head around our policies was, could we get rid of some of these just because there's so many of them?
And it's regurgitation of the law in
Yeah.
many ways, and when I brought this law firm in, we had been out, the legal, and I had been reading about in businesses where some were entering into fixed price contracts. Only one, it was really one of the larger law firms, bid on us. I saved $100,000 a year, and actually include the only cost that we would have that would potentially, if we ended up in court.
Is Neola a fixed rate like per year or is it per
It's a fixed
policy?
rate. No, it's you get so many updates, through the year. You're paying, a
Okay.
fee. Obviously, they're leveraging a huge volume
Right,
because I would say the high majority are probably using Neola.
right.
So as far as what we're obligated to do, nothing has changed, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
We are still allowed to change our procedures. We're still allowed to speak or make adjustments how we see fit.
Right.
And we are still able to bring in or create our own
Absolutely.
outside of Neola.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right.
One of the things that I learned just in speaking with another board member from another district here in Wisconsin that's in like the top 5% of districts is they actually have a committee that all they do is policy. And I'm not suggesting that you do that. I'm just sharing that with you guys. And I don't know if you've ever seen that before, but
That's been where our HR committee would do the policy.
yeah.
So it was one policy, one of the committees, but we were traditional standing committees.
So was that, when you say HR, was it personnel or it was just called HR?
It was the Human Resource Committee.
What, and
that
it was what, board members or was that like?
No, board members.
Okay,
Yeah, it was one of their standing committees, and that one was assigned policy.
Yeah.
Our HR department is one that's coordinated, and I think it makes sense. You've taken policy back to where it impacts.
right,
Yeah.
Right, versus the challenge with one committee, versus what is this policy about? If it's about finance, you'd want the finance committee potentially weighing in. If it's about how you're supervising or evaluating people and their legal implications, you'd want your HR, your personnel department, or to know. So I think what you've attempted to do is work back through committees. You've just selected some things and ignored a lot.
right.
And so therefore, you don't know what you don't know, in terms of what might be missing. And you could have some policies that might have changed to better protect the district or whatever that you haven't adopted.
Mhm.
And then you're not going to possibly know that much, until you might get into trouble and decide, geez, if we had the more current policy, maybe we wouldn't have this issue.
Right.
So
I think that let's start off by having Jim bring those big chunks of the policies,
let's start trying to
and trying to figure out where they need to go, if at a committee level or I'm sorry, at a different level or at exact, but how do we get them all updated in a reasonable amount of time?
I had the same thing in my last district that I went into. We were over 2 years behind on policies, and we separated out policies in terms of what were more of technical issues that really didn't have an impact. So they were easier to adopt, even though we took the time to review them, just because you really want to know what you have.
Right.
And it's always good to be able to be current, in terms of your understanding that you've got policies in place. But then others were more substantive, so significant changes in the law. And sometimes those you've got your policies broken down, whether or not it's professional, administrative support.
Right.
So sometimes the policy will repeat itself through these various groups,
Mhm.
right? How does this impact the professionals? How does this impact support group? So sometimes you're dealing with a policy that might impact different groups. And so you're going to have 4 policies that you're going to adopt, but it's really essentially addressing the same issue.
Right.
So if there are changes in labor laws and stuff like this, you're going to, wherever you have that reflected in terms of your policy that are supporting your work, where it will require some adjustment.
All right. Well, I look forward to the stack. All right, the next thing on our list here is, any updates on, I know you had presented to us about, the restructuring, or, the pilot school, any updates on?
Well,
either one of
the
those?
thing that's happening right now that I've been really encouraging and is Washington is really already working to arrange a site visit to Ohio,
Okay,
which I think is really good. And I'm trying to make sure that Franklin gets out there too, because the more we increase exposure, the more our teachers, our practitioners are engaged and can see something, the more they're going to understand. I have it also in terms of our meeting with the union, suggesting that we should have this as a topic of discussion.
okay,
Because we're gonna recognize in terms of what are we still missing as we're trying to educate people. So really, in many ways, we're probably having more visibility than we've had on any curriculum content area with what we've done. So in many ways, I think that is beneficial. Even though it is on a tight timeline, we've added a couple months to that process. Some of the questions are coming up now. There's such an interest. Should we think about expanding beyond the pilot if we go down and, for example, adopt SFA? So it's kind of changing the dynamics a little bit, in terms of what I was trying to figure out how to do, just so that I wasn't, based on our last 5 years, that I wanted something to compare and contrast with a proven model.
Right.
And I just felt that would all keep us honest. And now what's actually happening is that there are some that are interested, the more they read about it, that the more they saying, why wouldn't we do this for all? That wasn't something I was expecting, but now some of that discussion is surfacing.
Yeah, I could, from my own experience, I've had a few people reach out that have expressed that same sentiment.
Yeah.
Especially when you look at the evidence that's there, which to me is quite compelling, right? I mean, you look at districts that have similar challenges as we do when it comes to ELL population, economically disadvantaged students, free lunch, and just the success that they have had, to me is mind blowing. Right, 100% of the kids at that school are reading at grade level proficiency. Like no slowdown with COVID, right? They got through it. Like they survived. And I would say they thrived, right? So that to me is just amazing.
It also exhibits not only when you have a tight plan, that really has a lot of research behind it, but the execution of that plan.
Right.
Now, our challenge without something like that is, what are those pieces that we have to assemble into a system so that the school and every student will succeed at high levels? And that's what I liked about the comprehensive design. It doesn't take anything for granted. What are you doing with attendance? I would have to raise that as a separate subject matter in terms of, are we all looking at attendance in the same way at every school? Every school is probably looking at it.
Right.
What's the effectiveness? What's your process versus what did we find out with the student code of conduct? Everybody was doing something different, right?
Yep.
Success for all has a character education built into it, and some of the people supplemented more, recognizing how important that was. It's just the system is just more defined, and it's defined, with evidence behind what they've demonstrated. You do this, and it shows a percentage increase in the student achievement levels. So they evaluate what are those components that really impact student achievement. If kids aren't in school, obviously it's going to impact them, right? So that's an important component. Even though literacy is the foundation, cooperative learning is the foundation, all these other things are important. Because if you're only working part of the system and something else is eroding it, but I would expect if we're doing a good job, even though if you look at the last 5 years, and one still has to be concerned with only 25% of our kids reading at grade level.
Right.
Colin, what's holding us back?
Yeah. Colin, did you have your hand up at all?
My hand isn't up. But as far as I am in support of looking at the success for all outside of pilot. I do wonder why we would be doing. I mean, I know that you wanted to have a comparable, but have a concern about, the product of it being, there being a disproportion beyond implementation of those that experienced and did not experience. Sounds like a very good program. From what I've read, I think that it definitely, and you can even look to the information that we've been seeing. It's got proven results. So, I'm all for other results, but I'd like to see that all kids get that same opportunity. So that's the only thing I have really right now.
Tony, anything else, or Matt?
I would just say it's, again, just to reiterate how compelling it is to see the program work in districts that are comparable to ours. Before I came on the board, I was doing a lot of research, and I was told by a lot of people that, you can't really compare our district to those because we have different challenges. Manitowoc's different than all these other districts that you're looking at. And, to some extent, I disagreed, but, then I realized as you get into it, there are probably challenges that come with higher populations, right? In ELL and others. But that doesn't mean that they can't be successful or that they can't read at a great level of proficiency. So again, I just would like to reiterate, my commitment, and frankly, what I believe should be our commitment to the community, is that we owe it to our kids, all of them, that we get them to 95 to 100% in that area, right? They're doing it in Ohio. They're doing it in Arizona, and these schools have it worse off than we do. So to me, that's huge, a huge indicator. And, I think it's definitely worthwhile to look at it for beyond the pilot program. So we should really have that district wide as our target.
Okay, anything else? Any other updates at all? What about restructuring? Anything there that you wanted to share?
Just in checking with legal counsel in terms of how to do this and that it can disrupt individuals, into the organization going through this. I asked, is this a topic that can be discussed in closed session too? And because it does impact individuals, that would be beneficial. So I've asked you to, if we could have a closed session at the next regular board meeting on Tuesday, just for my sharing some of my thoughts in terms of how I'm looking at this and what I'm considering, in terms of tentative plans, because they're going to impact, individuals. And I think we need to be mindful of that, and that provides me an opportunity to share with you how I'm looking at this and how I'm moving through this and what the implications might be. Action to do something will be in open session.
I know you had talked about envisioning moving some of our specialists into the school.
Right.
What does that look like?
Well, one of the things, for example, when I was doing research on educator or teacher preparation, our universities that were preparing universities, one of the criticisms of many of the universities was that they were inadequately preparing teachers. And they suggested many of them been out of the classroom too long, in that they should have split appointments where they're actually teaching in schools as well as training new teachers.
Okay.
That's actually where I started getting that concept. And if you might recall, with some universities, they even actually had lab schools, where we send people out to for a student, going out and sending teachers, to schools to have experience with them. The more you do that, the more equipped they are before they're actually into it. And so some of this was really being able to demonstrate what good practice looks like, by having them not only, potentially co-teach, but demonstrate what that looks like in a classroom.
Is it kind of like a more advanced student teaching in a way?
Yeah. You have an environment, where you're actually modeling what that looks like, both from a curriculum as well as the pedagogy and how you instruct that.
Okay.
And the other thing we talked about that surface one of the things that I heard from many school sites when I was in the student behavior ad hoc group was that concerns, for example, at an elementary school, was that we got a concern, we call and there's nobody in the office because there's only one person.
Okay.
You know, what happens if you all of a sudden are putting some of our people, you know, back in school sites? You just have more resources there too. So there's many reasons why that could be beneficial
Okay.
than in central office, you know, where that's feasible. So I'm looking at, you know, and I started sharing this with some staff because we're into that curriculum, the reading curriculum review. You know, I'll look at that a little differently than I with math, but we've already done that with math. So I'm looking right now, opening up a conversation with where might that be a good location for that.
Okay.
And the one thing that came to mind, and this isn't, you know, this is, I'm still exploring in
Yeah.
terms of engaging others in terms, you know, I'm thinking of potentially at, because I had the pilot set for Washington,
Mhm.
I was thinking of putting the math out at Wilson.
Mhm.
And why I say that, there's a lot of research that indicates that many teachers aren't adequately trained in math,
Mm.
particularly at the middle school. What a
Okay.
great place then to demo
Mhm.
what that, you know, a good curriculum in math would look like, you know, not that that person doesn't sometimes have to go to the other sites, but you think of, you know, whether or not math teachers come in, they're actually seeing something in practice. So now here's a little lesson, here's what it looks like.
Got it.
I mean, so those are some of the thoughts. I would see, because of the importance of reading at grade level by grade 3,
Mhm.
that for reading, I'd pick an elementary school.
Okay. Makes sense.
And again, if there are other areas where I could reinforce and provide more support to schools, let me go back. You know, I'll offer one more thing, you know, to the extent that, which I'd really love to explore by chance, if we find ourselves going back to the pilot schools and what, you know, why just the pilot schools now based on what you're learning? Because that's a whole school type of reform, I would also try to explore whether or not it wouldn't be advantageous for us to figure out how to leverage something that comes with Success for All to train our students in elevated student achievement, where we drop the educator effectiveness model.
Right, you did
You
say
know,
that.
so that we are actually just leveraging what we're trying to implement, you know, to help us
So-
develop teachers as well as to try to take, you know, what can we take off the plates of teachers?
Right. So what I've come to learn, and you guys may know this, but there is it state mandated, I think?
Yeah,
Or
see,
might have been federal
it
mandated.
happened with feds in terms of giving out money. You know, they can't see, the Constitution says the responsibility for education are the states.
Mhm.
But when the feds control some of the purse strings, you know, they can have stipulations in terms of how to qualify for money. And one of the things was what's your evaluation system of your development evaluation system. So now states had to put together models.
Right. And so one of the things that has been brought up to us from at least the union is that, you know, teachers are also asking for things that can come off of their plate. And one of those things that they have suggested was this teacher effectiveness, the educator effectiveness piece, because it's labor intensive. And it looks like, I don't have my folder with me, but, you know, at least for the pilot schools in SFA, it's built into the program already. So that we would, actually, we'd ask the state of Wisconsin if they would allow us to use this internal
Right.
device
We
that's
might have to,
already.
you know, educate them in terms of how we would use
Right.
this, but it's a developmental model. It's meant to
So
develop
then,
the teachers as
so
well
then
as
we
the
wouldn't
students.
be having to do two different things.
So you can imagine what that looks like. You're having something that really is driving your improvement. And yet the state is saying, we can't trust you, so you got to use this
Tool.
tool. And now all of a sudden we're doing two tracks to accomplish the same thing.
Right.
Anybody that, you know, if you're going to have to do it because it's a legal requirement, you're going to try to figure out how to leverage it. But I know that some of our building principals are trying to figure out how to meet the minimum requirements of compliance because they just see it as a burden for them and their staff.
Right.
Others now have really locked into and figured out how to leverage at a higher level. I mean, it does have a lot of research in it with things that you expect people to already learn through the schools of education. I mean, you know, in many ways, if I were developing a plan, I would have done something that this district did many years back. I would have placed an emphasis on, for you to stay in the school district, you have 5 years to become nationally board certified.
Oh.
We have a number that have been nationally board certified because at one time we said that's important
Mm-hmm.
for you to own your development. But that's a lot. We have a lot of national board certified teachers because that was important to us at one time,
Sure.
because we recognized that they were at a much higher training level.
Mm-hmm.
They were better equipped. And see, I would put that back, responsibility back on, you know, that really, they own that development.
Right.
Obviously, we were providing financial incentive for them to do it. But see, I would have invested more to incentivize, you know, staff to reach higher levels of certification.
Any questions or thoughts at all for Jim about either topic?
I think that's a critical aspect of success for all, for using it as a vehicle to promote the reduction, not the reduction, the parallel track of achievement towards professional development of the teachers.
Right.
And that needs to be, but I understand it's a process though, so you can't sell it as it's the cure-all. It's a solution long-term for a problem.
Right, and I think, you know, what I keep seeing is a lot of the things that I read on SFA, I'll go, well, we do collect data. Well, we do education effectiveness. Oh, we do professional development. You know, we have all those pieces, but I mean, again, if I were an educator, and I think some of them feel this way, that nobody is, with the amount of work that they put in, you don't have the result.
Yeah.
And it's not, I mean, again, we can't boil it down to it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault. But if we had a system that had all these things in place and everyone was doing that same system, then you could pinpoint very directly, or at least a lot easier, of where the shortfall might be. And I think that's the frustration, is we have everybody, yes, doing elements of all these pieces put together, but are any one of them, if we look at any school, would we say we could take one of the schools that we have and model everything that they're doing because they're hitting those high marks? And we can't. So it's like, again, we have all these elements of these, you know, we have great staff. We're just missing, I mean, we think, right? We're missing this one piece that's going to put everything together and has backing, right? Because you could get an attendance program, or you could get emotional learning, you know, development part.
Education, I mean,
Right, and they can say that they are evidence-based, but they could be around for 1 year, 2 year, and we don't really know.
So what I'm hearing is the scaffolding to build a cohesive, systematic approach of improvement. We've had it in the past, however, maybe turnover, maybe retirement, whatever, we don't know exactly, let's not make a point. But you're saying if we can have a cohesive, which SFA was actually quite open to saying, they said, well, the front loading obviously is very heavy for the first couple of years. However, then once you kind of get your bearings with that structure of that scaffolding, then the district can maintain it themselves, obviously until a point where, you know, they don't need their resources, or they have just updates, but they're successful, you know, on their own with that scaffolding, that system approach. And I do believe we have that here in the past as well. However, I think that since we haven't really kind of re-dived into it for a while, obviously we can just talk about results. The results aren't fruit. Our fruits haven't shown that we are implementing, but we have those pieces,
Right,
but they're not put
definitely.
together right now. So that makes sense to me that we have great staff, we have great professionals in the district. Just we're losing some of that cohesiveness from attrition. Is really what it's called.
I think it just comes down to really just focusing on the basics, right? I mean, I used this analogy previously, but you know, if you're not great at free throws, how do you get better at free throws? right? You practice, right? So the thing I like about SFA, is first part of the day is reading, right? You attack it right away, get it while you're fresh, and you go on offense, right?
I remember though in dance, to give you a different non-sports, it's that you can practice all you want, but if you practice incorrectly, then the product's not going to be there.
That's
So
More detrimental.
right,
It's
so
actually more detrimental because you
Right.
create muscle memory in the wrong way.
correct. So again, if we have if we're using a system that one person picked, let's say whatever the school. I mean, I think of a good example right now is the code of conduct. I went to the last ad hoc meeting, and we still have schools are still doing their own things, even though we have this document. And I think that's the other thing is that we've been kind of going down that road for such a long time, and everyone's implemented the things that they feel work. But at the end of the day, we're still having people frustrated about discipline problems. So, I mean, again, it's I hear the word synergy, I hear the word cohesiveness, I hear the word systematic, and I think all that has to come together.
I think even on its fundamentals, it's reducing it down to the lowest denominator. I mean, yeah.
But they've also, again, they recognize part of our problem now is catch-up growth. And what they're recognizing is that the self-contained classroom that could have a 3-grade span of ability levels, that teacher has to take that all on. So what did SFA do? Not only did they say they need more reading, but they figured out how to get more people involved in teaching the reading and to break it up so that ability wasn't as great, so that they could move that person up to the next higher category,
Faster.
to the next higher, all trying to, but that also works for your better students.
Yeah.
Because you're also working them to get to the highest level that you can, by giving them what they need at that ability level, you're really helping them. So it's not only does it have a very strong phonics base, foundation, but it also is recognizing the work that you have in front of you, that you have to really figure out how to not only reach a year of annual rigorous growth, you now have to do catch-up growth. That could be 6 months to 3 years of trying to get kids coming up. And think about what happens if you look at our reading scores, they're low through all the grades because we missed it at 3rd grade. I mean, so the foundation is really important, but we have to do whatever we can, even at the middle school, trying to
elevate.
to get some of that back.
We can
So
figure
some of
that
these
out.
strategies, I think, could be a game changer.
Yeah, if we can figure that out and get that trend to reverse and back towards where it should be, right, 95 to 100% range, I think this is going to raise everything, right? A lot of our issues downstream are going to get.
Well, here's another way to look in terms of how you might look at making a decision here. What if the state were implementing next year that kids don't get advanced if they're not reading at grade level, like grade 3,
You mean like what Ohio does?
like
Yeah.
Michigan does?
I mean,
They
like
they adopted this with a big fight, but they adopted in Michigan. I mean, it was after that I left, but it was, I mean, somebody said we're doing them an injustice, even though there's a lot of research that says, holding kids back, can be detrimental. But if you're not reading and comprehending,
Compounds.
One thing I is it required? Am I interrupting?
No,
Oh, I keep hearing feedback, so my apologies. I didn't know if it was or not. But like, why don't we just can we move forward this? Our obstacle is our reading levels, and this has a component where there's more focus on it. So the reason that we're looking at it so extensively is because is in response to that. And then because this is also it is a school-wide reform, could we possibly segment out or not necessarily implement the whole school-wide reform aspect with such emergence? I mean, couldn't we do it in sections or, maybe even
I did ask Jim about that. He did ask.
and
And it sounds like SFA, they're willing to do whatever you want to do. They don't recommend doing it. They don't think you'll have these. What I had asked was, could we just adopt the reading program in every school and not the full reform model? And they didn't think that it would be, I didn't say they didn't say it would be effective, but they work
Some
with,
school districts shop for component parts.
Right.
I mean, in many ways, that's what a lot of schools do, is they're shopping for, you might have a curriculum, but what's your training for pedagogy? What's your training for data analysis? And those things are built into their system.
Right.
So you don't know what you're
So it's-
potentially.
it's not out of the realm of possibility,
Right.
but it didn't sound like it was, oh yeah, great idea.
well, and the reason that I say that is like, it's reform. And part of that reform is going to be culture, right? Culture takes time to build. So if we really want to get that culture to be built toward that model, well, it might take a little bit more time. But the emergent need, that's the reading scores, and that really needs to get addressed, yesterday, honestly. So, I guess to that extent, I think that would be an ideal setting. I'm not abandoning any direction here. I think that the direction still, I think, needs to still stay the same. But I think that, take on what your immediate needs are, and then fill in that culture change to when with the time and the diligence that it requires. So
All right, well, the last topic on here was board development topics, and I don't have any at this time to bring forward that anyone have brought up. So that's really at the end of our agenda. Any other questions about anything that was on our agenda? Otherwise, we can, I'll take a motion to adjourn, Colin.
I don't have anything.
Okay.
So I will just I'll make that motion to adjourn then.
Okay, and I'll second. And
Awesome.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Should have approved. All right, thank you, sir. I hope your kids get better.
They're doing good. It's just I didn't want to get everybody else sick, so kind of got to do the responsible thing. But thank you. Bye, everybody. Have a good.
Yep.
Or you didn't know.
I do, yes. Someone talking about like.
You want to take that?